Say, kids, what time is it?
It's story time!
All right. Hey, welcome everyone to our very first episode of Storytime with Old Dog. And today we're going to go ahead and start out with the Chronicle of Stone. You can also see I've got the cover right here up on the screen, but we're going to go ahead and start with this one. I have one of the rare copies where the first chapter is actually missing from the book. So we're going to start with me reading it off of my tablet here. And as soon as we're done with that, I'll then continue on and read it from the actual book so you guys get the full Storytime experience with the actual real good old-fashioned paper books. I love ebooks, but hey, can't beat a good old-fashioned paperback. All right, so here we go. The Chronicle of Stone, the first book in the Jason and the Chrononaut series. Jason stumbled on the slick ice in the underground cavern. His father reached down and pulled him back to his feet as they ran. They stopped short. Another dead end. Spinning around, Jason's heart pounded heavily in his chest when the polar bear rounded the corner and regarded them with cold eyes, focusing its attention on Jason. Jason's father suddenly lifted him up and placed him in a smaller tunnel that led away from the dead end. "Go!" he yelled. "Not without you," Jason yelled back. His father smiled sadly. "I can't fit, but I won't let this happen to you again. He was cut off abruptly when the polar bear knocked him aside with a massive paw and clawed at the edges of the enclosed tunnel to get at Jason. "Dad!" Jason cried out as he bolted upright in bed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His heart thudded deeply in his chest as he looked around the darkness of his room. He wasn't in an ice cave about to get eaten by a polar bear. He was safe in his bed at home. The door to his room opened suddenly and his mother hurried in, switching on the light. "Jason, what's the matter?" He couldn't keep the tears from flowing down his cheeks. She rushed over and held him tightly. "It's okay, honey. I'm here." "Dad." "Shh, sweetie. I miss him too." She held him closer, but the tears started welling up in her own eyes as she soothed him. "Go back to sleep, honey. You have school tomorrow and you need your rest." She tucked him back into bed and looked down at him with a sad smile. "Everything will be better in the morning." "He'll still be gone tomorrow, Mom." She sniffed in her own tears and struggled to keep her smile. "But every day we get a little stronger. If your father were still here, he would say time heals all wounds." Jason laughed through the tears. He did say that a lot. She laughed too and used her sleeve to clear away the tears from his cheeks. "Your father was the best man I ever met. I see him in you a little more each day." She wiped away her own tears and stood up. "Now you need to get some sleep. The one thing I need is for you to take after your father's... The one thing I don't need is for you to take after your father's lack of timeliness. He was late to everything, even our wedding. He almost missed you being born. But he did make it." She smiled and nodded. "Yes, he made it and was the first one to hold you in his arms. I still remember him telling you that he was working on getting more time, whatever that meant." "I miss him, Mom." "Me too, sweetie. Me too. Now you get some sleep so you're not late for class." "I'm rarely late." She looked at him down the bridge of her nose. "We both know that's not true. I've given you a lot of leeway since. It's time to start being responsible. I want you to promise me you'll get to school on time from now on." "I promise." She regarded him for a moment and then bent down to kiss him on the forehead. She paused at the door to his room. "You won't be late?" Jason held up 3 fingers. "Scout's honor." "You were never a Boy Scout," she said as she turned off the light and closed the door. Jason stared up at the ceiling and couldn't sleep, but promised himself that, despite staying awake, he wouldn't be late. The first bell rang just as Jason reached the edge of the football field behind his middle school. If he was late again, the Stain promised he would give him no less than 2 weeks of detention. He couldn't lose that kind of time, not with the hockey season starting back up. If he missed the tryouts, he would have to sit out the entire season. He started running and vaulted the low chain-link fence that bordered the football field. He just might make it before the second bell if he ran through the field rather than going all the way around it. His backpack caught on the jagged edge of the fence, yanking him backward. He fell sideways as his backpack ripped down one side and spewed its entire contents all over the grass. He rolled to his feet and gathered the papers and books that were scattered all around him. As he tried to stuff the items back into his shredded backpack, a shadow fell across him. He looked up as a man bent down, lifted up a small black leather-bound book, and held it out to him with a smile. "Don't forget this." Jason took his journal from the man. "Thanks." The second bell rang. The man looked toward the school where the last few kids disappeared into classrooms. It immediately looked deserted and silent, even though every classroom was brimming with noisy students still being urged to settle down by their teachers. He looked back at Jason. "You're late." Jason tucked his journal into the backpack and cradled it as he stood up to keep the contents from spilling back out again. "Tell me about it." "Don't worry. Soon you will be the master of time," the man said as he patted Jason on the shoulder. Jason smiled nervously and ducked away from the man's touch. "I've got to go." Without waiting for a response from the man, he started running across the field. When he reached the other side, he looked back. The man was gone. A chill ran down his spine as he continued running to his classroom. Once he reached the door, he grasped the handle and pulled. Locked. Mr. Stein always kept his door locked. He said it was to protect the kids from anyone trying to get in, but Jason knew it was so that none of his students could sneak in after the second bell. He let out a big sigh and knocked on the door. It opened up and Mr. Stein looked down at him over the rim of his glasses. "So nice of you to join us, Mr. Ryder." Jason ducked past him into the room. "It's not like history is going to change if I'm late," he thought to himself, smart enough not to say it out loud. Mr. Stein closed the door after him. "It's disrespectful to your classmates to interrupt class because you can't keep track of time." "It won't happen again, Mr. Stein." "What was that, Mr. Ryder?" Oops. He had slipped and said the nickname all the kids used when talking about him. Maybe he hadn't noticed because Jason had mumbled it. Jason repeated again louder, saying his name more clearly this time. "It won't happen again, Mr. Stein. You said that the last time. I'm assigning you 2 weeks detention." "What? No! I have hockey tryouts next week after school." "You should have thought of that before interrupting my class. Again." He pointed to Jason's desk, clearly ordering him to sit down and be quiet. He forgot about the damage the fence had done to his backpack, and as he set it down on his desk in exasperation, everything slid out and spilled across the floor. Half the class laughed at his continued misfortune. "Clean that up quietly, Mr. Ryder, unless you want me to add another week to your detention." Jason gathered up his books with as little noise as possible. Not easy when the loose binder paper rustled as he scooped them together, and sat down at his desk while the teacher began his lecture. The stain picked up right where he had left off, as if he had been on a recording, paused, keeping his back to the students while he wrote seemingly random words on the whiteboard to highlight his dry monologue. Maybe history was exciting to some people. In the movies, the teachers always dressed up like great historical figures and brought history to life. But this was real life, and in real life, his teacher droned on like an emotionless robot. It was a good thing that history happened in the past. It was so boring, it would be a shame to be forced to experience it firsthand. As the stain monologued on, Jason pulled the little black leather-bound book out of his backpack and opened it to the first available blank page. At least, the history of his own life wouldn't be as boring as what happened to everyone else. He began writing in his private journal, using the secret code he and his father had created before. Jason closed his eyes, and the present world gave way to his history as he thought of a time when his father still came home every night. He jumped and his journal flew out of his hands when the stain loudly smacked a yardstick across the top of his desk. Everyone in the classroom laughed as he looked around him, still disoriented from being lost in his memories. The teacher leaned down and picked up his journal. He stood back up and placed it on Jason's desk. "Now that you are back among the living, Mr. Ryder, gather your things. Your presence has been requested in the office." Jason sat on the hard wooden chair outside the principal's office. He clutched his backpack tightly in his lap, trying to keep everything from falling out of it again. He could hear several voices coming from inside the principal's office. One of them didn't sound too happy. He couldn't make out what was being said, but he hoped this didn't have anything to do with him. He was a good kid. Except for the occasional detention due to being late to school, he really didn't get into any serious kind of trouble. But the loud and muffled male voice coming through the 70-year-old walls of the school building sounded like all kinds of serious. It suddenly became very quiet in the principal's office, and the door opened. He expected to see whoever was in there leave before he was called in. Instead, Ms. Rosen, the principal, stepped out and smiled at him. Her smile radiated sadness rather than joy. "If you would please come in, Jason." Jason swallowed and his mouth went dry. Whoever was in there, whoever had been yelling at the school principal, was there because of him. He followed Ms. Rosen into her office, hugging his backpack tightly in front of him like he was walking in front of a firing squad and it was a bulletproof vest. He took one look at the 3 men in dark suits who were all in turn silently watching him walk into the small room, and it really did feel like he was stepping in front of a firing squad. The 2 men who stood against the back wall were huge. They had barrel-sized chests that stretched the seams of their identical black suits. Their size made the skinny black ties over their starched white shirts look ridiculous. They looked like a cross between World Wrestling Federation superstars and the secret government agents known as the Men in Black. In stark contrast to the 2 hulking men, the man that stood in front of the principal's desk was rail thin and not much taller than Jason. The man peered at him intently through wire-framed glasses, a sheen of sweat forming along the top of his balding head. This man wore the same black suit as the gorillas behind him, but he accented it with a bright red scarf tucked into the breast pocket of his coat that matched the same fire engine red brilliance of his thin tie. The thin man smiled at him as he entered. "Hello, Jason." Jason gulped. Hi?" The man pushed the chair in front of Ms. Rosen's desk out. "Have a seat." Jason looked to Ms. Rosen for guidance. She smiled sadly and nodded. He sat down and the thin man perched on the edge of the desk, staying at a higher level and towering over Jason. They sat there staring at each other for what felt like forever until Jason couldn't take the silence any longer. "Am I in trouble?" The thin man's smile unnerved him. "Not at all. In fact, I think you can help us." Jason looked at Ms. Rosen. The thin man snapped his fingers in the air. "Don't look at her. I am the only one in the room you need to pay attention to." Jason quickly glanced back at the thin man. "Who are you?" "Where are my manners? My name is Special Agent Duncan Hauser. I know that is a mouthful for someone so young, so you can call me Agent Hauser. Let me ask you something, Jason. Have you ever been to Egypt?" That was a strange question. "Egypt? No." "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. The farthest I've been to is Florida when my mom took me to Disney World last summer." Hauser tapped his chin with a bony finger, never taking his eyes off of Jason. "Interesting. Your full name is Jason Distance Ryder, is it not?" "Yes." "Interesting middle name. Distance. Not Daniel or David. My dad used to tell me it was to remind me to always go the distance in everything I do." "But that still makes your initials JDR. Why did you call me in here, Agent Hauser? What is this about?" Direct and to the point. I like that. Your father should have named you Jason Direct Ryder." "Did you call me in here to discuss my unique middle name?" "No. I would like to see your diary." "My what?" "The book you write in every day." "You mean my journal?" "Diary, journal, whatever. Show it to me." Jason gripped his backpack tighter. "Why?" Hauser sighed heavily and reached forward, yanking the backpack out of Jason's hands. Ms. Rosen took a quick step forward, most likely to say something regarding his treatment of one of her students, when Hauser waggled a finger at her, sending her slinking silently back to a corner of her office. Hauser upended the backpack, spilling the contents onto the top of the desk from the hole in the side. Jason's journal flopped onto the pile of books, binders, and loose papers, and slid down one side. Hauser smiled and snatched the book off the desk. He thumbed through it hastily, smiling wider with each page. He snapped his fingers at one of the 2 gorillas behind him and held his hand out. The agent on his left handed him a bright red plastic bag emblazoned with the word "Evidence" in bright yellow capital letters diagonally across it. Hauser sat down in the principal's chair and set Jason's journal in front of him on the desk, open to the first page. He ripped through the seal on the evidence bag and carefully removed a worn book with yellowed pages about the same size as Jason's journal. He set it tenderly on the desk next to the journal and opened it to the first page. He placed the index fingers of both hands onto the same locations on the inside covers of each book. He looked up at Jason and smiled. "JDR," was all he said before returning his full attention back to the 2 books. He flipped several pages forward in Jason's journal and then carefully flipped the same number of pages in the crumbling book. Hauser glanced back and forth between the old book and Jason's journal, his smile growing wider. Jason craned his neck to see what the agent was looking at. It's not like Hauser could read his journal anyway. Jason only ever recorded his thoughts in the unique language his dad had invented and taught to him before he even learned to read and write English. That was his private journal, and it would stay that way. Hauser noticed him trying to sneak a peek at the two books. He stood quickly and spun them around, sliding them across the desk and directly under Jason's nose. Jason looked at the books sitting side by side, and his jaw nearly hit the floor. The yellowed pages on the ancient book were written in the same language as his journal. Looking closer, he noticed that there was more to it than that. The page in the old book was identical to the page in his journal. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the old book when Hauser pulled it back just out of reach. He looked up at the agent. "What is this?" Hauser shot a look at the principal and she exited her office, closing the door after her, leaving Jason alone in the room with the mysterious government men. Hauser started to slide the old book back into the torn evidence bag when it tumbled from his hand and flopped open onto the desk. The page was half filled with writing on one side and completely blank on the other. That far back in the book, it had to have been the final entry. Jason took the chance to scan the page quickly before Hauser snatched it back up and placed it into the evidence bag. "I've been looking a long time for you, Jason," Hauser said. Jason's brain couldn't wrap itself around what he had just seen. He pointed to the bag in Hauser's hand. "Where did you get that?" "It was discovered in an Egyptian tomb by American scientists in 1916 and brought back to the United States." He held the bag up. "My best scientists inform me that this book has been enclosed in that tomb since the mid-27th century BC. Since it was written in an unknown language, cryptographers have been working tirelessly for 5 decades to break the code and find out what this book says. They have gotten nowhere in all that time. But even more perplexing to scientists and historians alike was the 3 characters on the inside of the front cover written in a language that wouldn't exist until 3,000 years after this book was sealed in that tomb." Jason placed his finger on the inside cover of Jason's journal. Hauser placed his finger on the inside cover of Jason's journal. When Jason looked where Hauser pointed, he saw the initials of his name written by his dad when he presented him with the black leather journal on his 7th birthday, JDR. He gave Jason a wicked smile. "Now that I've finally found the person who wrote this mysterious journal, I can unlock its secrets." All right, so let's go ahead and put a bookmark in there. We'll use one of our ODNT cards here, Old Dog New Trick cards. So we'll put a lock in that. So that was the very first episode. I'm going to go ahead and read the entire series for Jason the Chrononauts. Books 5 and 6 are done. They're going through the editing gauntlet now. So they should be out and available by the time I get around to it. If you're enjoying me reading this to you, go ahead and please share this video with everyone. Let everyone know. Let the views go crazy on these. Share it. Show it. Tell everyone about it. This is going to be a lot of fun. And by all means, help me out and pick up a copy of Jason and the Chrononauts from Amazon. An ebook, it's only $2.99, so it's not that big of an expense for you, but that would really help me out. And definitely let everyone know about these books and tell everyone to watch the videos and pick up a copy for themselves and help me out. So thank you very much. Have a good night. We'll start on the next episode soon.